And so it may just be in the best interests of two believing people to just hold on, don't freak out, have faith that God is going to follow through on what He said He was going to do, that some of the good works that He started in the marriage, that He's going to continue to work in those ways and continue to develop those things. And so the likelihood of a restored marriage being an option is really quite an attractive one, given some of these other options. We'll look at. I'll just leave it there. I want to go on to exemption number 3, which, if you turn to Matthew 19, Matthew 5, you're going to find Jesus talking about this. I'll do a quick aside to give you some context about what was going on in marriage during the days that Jesus walked the earth. And I'm taking this from a book by David Instone Brewer, and it is called Divorce and Remarriage in the Bible. It's something that I read this last year, and I was really, really surprised that there was kind of two groups of rabbis. Jesus was a rabbi, so people would come to him and ask him questions on religious matters and matters of life and what's right and what's wrong, morality, etc., etc., etc. He got this marriage thing a couple times. Sometimes I think by legitimate people that had legitimate questions. Other times, unfortunately, we're told it was just people trying to mess with him and trying to bait him and troll him and trying to trap him into saying the wrong thing so that they could, disprove who he was and all this stuff, have some bad things to say against him. But he got this marriage question, I think, quite often. And what I didn't realize until I read this book by Mr. Instone Brewer was this, that there were two groups basically of rabbis. Like one group, the Shammaites, the other group, the Hillelites. And the Shammaites, they were more reserved. They said there should only be very certain circumstances under which divorce is allowable. We don't want to have a lot of divorces, so let's kind of keep this thing reined in a little bit. The other group, the Hillelites, I'll go over here, the Hillelites, they were more kind of divorce for anyone who wants it, just kind of at-will divorce, similar to the Reagan legislation that passed, the no-fault divorce, where if people wanted out, you didn't have to have a good reason. There were no good reasons. It's just like a matter of happiness, preference, or whatever you want to do. And there's really nothing that bonds or keeps people kind of in in the relationship for the long haul. It's just, if you're not happy, you're out, and that's fine. So divorces were pretty common, you can imagine. And actually, it was this group that won out in the long run by the 1st and the 2nd century. The folks that said, divorce for whatever reason you want is fine with us. They kind of won the day and became the popular group and had the most influence over time. So there were a lot of divorces. I always thought, traditional times and all that. No. I was really surprised to learn that. So that was an interesting thing. So going back to Jesus, he gets all these people and he's saying, they're asking him, well, can we divorce our wives or our husbands for any reason? And he basically said, I want to make sure I get this right. He said, whoever divorces his wife and marries another, except for sexual immorality. Now there's the exception clause, number 3, except for sexual immorality. And he goes on, and marries another person, commits adultery. So there you kind of have it. If you want to avoid adultery, if you don't want to, build your second marriage on adultery, there's some things to kind of consider. And this third one is if there was events of sexual immorality. It seems helpful at face value, but unfortunately, if you look it up and you talk to a lot of people and you do some research, you'll find that it's not all that clear what that includes and what it doesn't. So, for example, I think most people would say, even though that is a different word, you'd have kind of this umbrella thing of sexual immorality. And maybe under this umbrella you'd have one thing called adultery. And that was a pretty easy one that was talked about. It was the word moakeia, which is a Greek word for adultery. So one thing you learn is that adultery is kind of like this one in a list of many things under the greater banner or umbrella of porneia, or of sexual immorality. Now, there's been unfortunately some disagreement about this. Some people have said porneia means incest, explicitly and exclusively incest. And other people said, no, 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 that's not what it means. It means fornication. So fornication, like physical sexual relations with someone else. So they would say, it could be anything from, like, I guess, like kissing or maybe even hand holding, I don't know, all the way to, sex. So anything in between there, that would be like fornication. Folks would say, if any of those things happened, then this hits Jesus's sexual immorality clause, and so then, divorce is then on the table to be considered, and people can do that and, then move ahead with their lives. Now, a third group, and other people would say that there's even like things outside of fornication, so all kinds of stuff like online dating, flirting, emotional relationships, viewing pornography or seeing naked people, having lustful thoughts. And some people take it all the way to the extreme where there's this other verse Jesus talks about, if you, see someone and lust over them in your mind, that you've, like, in your heart or you've kind of done like the early stages of adultery in your desires. And some people will go all the way to say, they'll take that and they'll say, well, that's just the same thing, or it's in the same ballpark, and so it fits under the umbrella. And so anyone that's had like a bad thought, or seen a movie and there was a naked person or something, or they walked down the street and they saw someone attractive, and then they get into this whole mess of whether like you're even able to notice if someone is like physically attractive around you, like and that if you thought you noticed that, or you thought that about them, then you're in danger of blowing your whole marriage. Obviously, I think that's a little bit too extreme for where I stand, but you have the whole gamut. And the problem is, people are, all people struggle with sin. And so, it's not just certain categories like, the way we think, whether we have, misconceptions or prejudices or things like that sins of the mind kind of, or sins of the emotion, or complainy, or entitled, or proud, and actually, the scriptures say some really interesting things about pride and how dangerous that is, but it doesn't get brought up a lot. You could have problems with your mouth, that you slander people, you talk down to them, you have, you say coarse jokes or all these other things, and then you can have, other things as far as sexual sins with your body. And so people kind of have sin in all those areas, and so you kind of get into this whole mess where, well, which marriage can really even make it? And some people have even said, if the rules are going to be so strict like that, then maybe it's just better not to marry at all, since no one can actually live up to what marriage requires, and everyone would basically get divorced anyway, so what's the point? This is all kind of the stuff that you're going to run into, and you're going to have to try to sort it out as best as you can. But one thing I would say is that if you kind of do your homework, if you think through these things, if you read and pray and seek God, I think He will really help you come to this conclusion, which I think is really helpful. To be able to come to the point where you have a confidence about your situation, whether, although it may be hard, God is asking you to follow through on your end of the marriage agreement, even while your spouse is struggling. And they may be struggling very, very significantly. If you can come to make that decision, that's going to be a huge benefit for you. One, for either locking down and feeling a strong conviction about praying and getting serious about standing for your marriage and what God has brought together in your life, or moving on. If you decide to move on, it's really great too, because a lot of the people that you may date, or they may have been previously married. So you're going to be able to really ask and try to sort through in a much better way their situation, if you feel comfortable marrying them. Because like I said before, one of the first things you wouldn't want to do is be like, 2 weeks away from your second wedding, and you're not sure if you're going to commit adultery with this person. Also, what's really rough is, think about this scenario. Say that you marry somebody where it's not clear exactly whether God has removed His hand of blessing and the covenant has been broken in their first marriage, You marry them, you're going along, and then all of a sudden their first spouse shows back up into the picture. You're going to be thinking, well, I mean, and I don't even know about this from God's point of view, but which marriage is He going to bless at that point? And you're going to have you're going to be in a real pickle, because, yeah, I wouldn't want to see people get into that situation. I think that's kind of the best I have for today. I'm going to look at these notes here real quick. I think that's basically it, but that's what I mean when I say covenant spouse, covenant marriage, and why I kind of think through this in an important way to avoid future adultery, to select a good spouse, and to consider what God would have you do as far as your most recent marriage, whether it's best for you to, to believe that